This is a podcast by the Straits Times.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Speaking of Asia. I'm Ravi Velloor. In this episode, I focus on the remarkable prominence in U.S. politics of Americans with an Indian heritage and the rise of Kamala Harris as a contender for the presidency of the United States. Ms. Harris, who's black, is also the first person of Asian origin to head a major party ticket in U.S. elections. And if she wins, she will be the first woman president of America. Even if she loses the race to Donald Trump, there will be another woman of Indian descent standing on the podium on Capitol Hill. That would be Usha Vance, who is the wife of Trump's running mate, J.D. Vance. To discuss this remarkable phenomenon, I have with me the veteran Chicago-based journalist and broadcaster Mayank Chhaya. Mayank is an old friend of mine, and he's worked in senior positions at several diaspora publications, including India Abroad in New York and India Post in California. Welcome to Speaking of Asia, Mayank.
Thank you so much, Ravi. It's a great pleasure to be with you.
Mayank, this U.S. election has electrified the whole world because of the sudden and unexpected rise of Kamala Harris as a contender against Donald Trump. Now, Ms. Harris says she's black. Trump says she's not black, but Indian. What's going on, and how much of this is accurate?
Well, on the Trump side, this is his familiar game. This is Trump-style dog whistling. He had done it with Barack Obama by asking for his birth certificate in a clear show of racism. And he's trying to do something similar as dog whistle to his base, but it's not gaining any traction. It's pretty clear where Kamala Harris stands. She wrote a book called The Truth We Told an American Way, where she clearly says that her Indian Tamil mother, Shyamala Gopalan, who was a cancer researcher, and I'm quoting Kamala Harris from the book now. She says, "My mother knew very well that she was raising two black daughters. She knew that her adopted homeland would see me and Maya as black girls, and she was determined to make sure we would grow into confident, proud black women," unquote. At the same time, though, Harris has very fondly talked about her Tamilian side, including especially her passion for food. And she has never really tried to hide anything. She has balanced rather well. But the simple fact is that she went to Harvard University, which is a very distinguished black university. And her trajectory was in that direction. And she has predominantly been seen as African American in that sense, which is ironic because if you have a mother from the Indian side and father from the Jamaican side, whose name in fact, he's still alive, Donald J. Harris. He's 85 years old now. I'm always intrigued when people predominantly talk about the father's side of the heritage and not the mother's side. So I would say it's a silly debate, but it's election season, so Trump will do everything that he can to throw darts at her. That's how I see it.
That's fascinating. But what does Kamala Harris's rise say about politics in America?
Then it's undergone a remarkable transformation over the last 20 years or so, as it was evident in the rise of Barack Obama in 2008. In fact, when Barack Obama came from nowhere as a relatively less-known senator from Chicago, where I am, it wasn't expected that he would make it, but he did. And in fact, the talk then was that America has now entered what they call post-racial America, which at that point sounded rather interesting, but it turned out to be not the case at all, as Trump later made everybody aware of. Kamala Harris has been a fascinating story. She is, of course, strong liberal from California. She has risen through the ranks on the legal side of American life. And I think what it says about American life is that despite its flaws, America has begun to accept diversity in its politics, in its corporate life, in its culture, in its show business. There is some animosity in certain sections of the country, but by and large, I think America has done quite remarkably well.
Mayank, you could say that Kamala has multiple identities. She's a woman, she's black, she's also Indian and Asian. Now, are these plus points or are they weaknesses when ranged against a personality like Donald Trump?
It depends on how the particular person plays it. Kamala Harris has chosen not to highlight it too much, other than the fact that people do see her as African American in many ways. She has kept it low profile, even while not coming across as someone who is embarrassed about her biracial heritage. I think it can be problematic in certain sections of America, but I think America has, after Barack Obama, sort of internalized that this is the trajectory this country is on. We have talked about the fact that Indians barely constitute 1% of America's population at 4.4 billion. And yet, if you see the growth in every walk of life, it's been extraordinary. So Kamala Harris, in a sense, is emblematic of that growth. And it's remarkable that she already made history as vice president. And for all you know, she will make history when she might get elected in November.
We'll come back to the diaspora in a moment, but to stay on the subject of Kamala Harris, Mike, now you live in Chicago and you're surrounded by so-called swing states such as Wisconsin and Ohio. What are Ms. Harris's chances in these states?
At this stage, it seems a bit iffy, but what has happened is after President Biden withdrew, there has been a sudden upsurge among the independent voters, a lot of whom are in the states that you mentioned. And they have begun to look at the Democratic ticket a little more tolerantly than they did when Biden was around. And one of the major points that they used to raise about Biden was his age and his apparent decline in cognitive capacity. And suddenly they are confronted with someone who is just 59 years old. I'm talking about Kamala Harris. If you think about it, Trump is barely 7 or 8 years younger than Kamala Harris's father. So suddenly the age debate has gone against him. Now that Kamala Harris is at the top of the ticket, I think you would begin to see independent voters, especially suburban white women, who might look at Kamala Harris far more indulgently than they have so far. And I think in that context, it's important to remember that although she has come in so late, she has energized not just the Democratic base, but even the independent base quite remarkably. And that wave could help her in all these swing states that we are talking about. And it's been a surprise for a lot of people. But I think people were looking for a way out between Biden and Trump. A lot of them did not want Trump, but as long as Biden was there, out of sheer tribal loyalties, they decided to stick to Trump. But now that Biden is out and there is a younger woman, I think there could be a change in the way they look at the ticket now.
Mayank, you spoke about white suburban women voting for Harris. I wrote a column this week where I spoke about two things. First, that if you look at American elections after 1960, which is the Nixon and Kennedy face-off, there is a tendency for Americans to vote for the younger candidate, especially if that candidate is Democrat. Is this something that you would agree with?
I certainly would. I think she has come across, although she has been around for 4 years as vice president, her rise to the top of the ticket has really excited people beyond the Democratic Party, something that not a lot of people are expecting. So I wouldn't be very surprised if she might go all the way to the White House come November.
The other thing I noted in my column was that after Barack Obama, there was something some might call a white lash, a sort of resistance to black politicians for a while, and partly because of the 8 years of the Obama presidency and the incumbency factor. And within about a decade, perhaps, or decade and a half, America is no longer going to be predominantly a white nation, according to demographic trends. Do you think this could have some sort of an effect in voting behavior this time?
Indeed, in fact, part of the rise of the so-called Make America Great Again, the mega base that Trump has created, is seen as a response to this major demographic shift. In fact, there is a great deal of paranoia, and that plays into the very fact that you said at the beginning of the interview about Trump talking about Kamala Harris's identity, whether she's Indian, she's black, what is she? I think that's exactly what he was doing by saying that he was otherizing Kamala Harris, by saying she has to choose the side as if she can't be on both sides simultaneously because she comes from a biracial heritage. But this point plays particularly well in southern parts of America, and especially among people who are not necessarily college educated. They do go along with this characterization that Trump has thrown at Kamala Harris and he had thrown at Barack Obama as well. So I think it is a problem, but I can also tell you, having observed this for a while, that people are beginning to tire of Trump's shtick now. It's the same thing that he keeps recycling, and even more incoherently than before, if you could believe that.
I can believe it. To widen the lens a bit, Mayank, now, even if Ms. Harris loses, there will still be an Indian-American woman standing on the podium on Inauguration Day on Capitol Hill, and that is Usha Vance, wife of Trump's running mate J.D. Vance. Can you talk about Indian Americans in U.S. politics? And I do remember that in the primaries, Trump defeated Nikki Haley.
Right. If you look at the history of the rise of Indian Americans in mainstream politics, we are talking about 30 years from 1990 onwards, when Democrat Kumar Barve was elected to the Maryland state legislature. In fact, he was the first one, and he has been the longest serving in that sense. He was followed by Swati Dandekar and Satvir Chaudhary. Both Democrats were elected in the 1990s to the Iowa and Minnesota legislatures, respectively. Of course, you have the case of Piyush Bobby Jindal, who became the first Indian American governor of a state, Louisiana in this case, in 2007, followed by Nimrata Nikki Haley in 2011 in South Carolina. She was the first female governor of South Carolina. Now, you have to remember that these are very deep South states. And for Indian Americans to rise in these states,
South of Dixie.
Yeah, indeed. It speaks a great deal about their ability to reach out to mainstream Americans. And Ravi, the rise of Indian Americans in U.S. politics is brilliantly evident in the current 5 members of the House of Representatives. They are Ro Khanna and Ami Bera, both from California, Pramila Jayapal from Washington State, Raja Krishnamurthy from Illinois, and Sri Thanedar from Michigan. Together, they constitute the largest representation of Indian American members of Congress in U.S. history. That's quite extraordinary. It is also interesting that the 5 make up a little above 1% of the total strength of the House at 435 members, which compares rather well with the total population of Indian Americans of about 4.4 million out of the total of 336 million. And now, of course, it's sort of accepted that Indian Americans are everywhere, in every walk of life in this country. I was just going through the latest list of people, say, in the corporate world, for instance. Before I get into the names, I'll tell you something rather fascinating that happened today. A federal court ruled that Google is a monopoly. Now, that's it's a dramatic story, but I was looking at the 3 main players involved in this story. The judge is someone called Amit P. Mehta, Indian American. The main player is Sundar Pichai, the Google boss. And one of the main contenders was Microsoft's Satya Nadella. To think that these 3 Indian Americans are at the very heart of perhaps the largest corporate battle of its kind, in a way underscores how far Indians have moved. Now, look at this list. Sundar Pichai, I mentioned Satya Nadella. There is Neil Mohan at YouTube. There is Ajay Banga, ex-MasterCard, who went on to become the World Bank president, Shantanu Narayan at Adobe, Vasant Narasimhan at Novartis, Arvind Krishnan at IBM, Lakshman Narasimhan at Starbucks, and Leena Nair at Chanel. Look at the range from fashion to pharmaceuticals to technology. And another point that I would like to make, Ravi, is if you look at the rise of AI, 2 men who are once again at the very core of this are, again, Satya Nadella and Sundar Pichai. So it's extraordinary. They, at 4.4 million, Indian Americans are punching so much above their weight. Even the Jewish community hasn't been able to do it this well so quickly.
That's remarkable. Mayank, one person you didn't seem to mention was Vivek Ramaswamy, who straddles the world of technology and politics. What do you think of him?
I try not to think of him much because I think I see him as someone who has used his sheer bluster and wealth to get where he is, which is interesting. I mean, he is very good at messaging. He has been able to enunciate the Republican message rather well, but at the same time, he has been an extraordinary opportunist, if you think in terms of the way he used to abuse Trump for a long time. And now he's completely on his side, quite like what Nikki Haley has done. Nikki Haley called him toxic openly, and now suddenly she is okay with him. So I think these are all political opportunists, and I'm not sure if Vivek Ramaswamy is here for long term. I mean, I would be surprised if he would be. He's young, he's very well spoken, he is in your face, which is what a lot of Americans like. But by and large, I don't know if he will survive as a political force. That's one of the reasons why I thought it would be not very proper to include him with the rest of the illustrious names that I've mentioned.
How did these Indian Americans get to be so successful? Is it just plain smarts, or are there other skills involved? And what would be those skills?
I think it begins with a great deal of education. I mean, if you look at the difference between immigration to Britain and immigration to America, there is a distinct difference in the kind of people who have come to America because of the immigration system here. I think apart from the smarts, it's also the American system which allows people of different backgrounds to rise. I think it's a great tribute to America that this has happened. I wonder whether it would happen in too many other countries. Of course, it happened in Britain as well. Singapore, where you're sitting, is an example of that too. But by and large, Indians here have chosen to systematically work their way up from local politics, city politics, state politics, and then they work their way up. I think it's also the fact that in terms of earnings, they are now the highest. They are even more than the Jewish American community. They've left Chinese behind in terms of personal earnings. So all of those things, education and money play a great deal of part in their success. And plus, Indians are not very shy of going for what they want. They are known across the board. I mean, even in a place like Fiji, for instance, you had Mahendra Chaudhary, you had Basdev Pandey in Trinidad. So politically, Indians have always been savvy no matter where they are, and irrespective of the background that they rose from. In Trinidad, they went as indentured labor. And from there to rise to the positions, it's quite extraordinary. So I'm not surprised that Indians have risen here at all. And add to the fact that the best of the best have come to this country.
Fun question, Mike. Do Indians integrate well with American society, and are they accepted?
Superficially, they do, and they are accepted to the extent that America accepts any ethnic group. I think Indians also, a lot of Indians are careful in not being very overtly what they are. Of course, it has changed since 2014 with the rise of Prime Minister Modi in India. It's an interesting shift. Indians have become rather far more self-assured about their cultural heritage than they were. And I say this purely as a matter of fact. I have no opinion one way or the other on whether it is good or bad. But I think they've done a terrific job of balancing the cultural predilections with assimilation that is needed to be in this country. And I think, once again, it's a tribute to America that it has accepted Indians the way they are, like they've accepted a lot of other communities.
Thank you, Mayank Chhaya, for coming and speaking of Asia. It's been a wonderful conversation.
Thank you so much, Ravi. I was elated when you invited. I'm grateful, and it's wonderful to talk to you.
And that's a wrap for Speaking of Asia. I'm Ravi Velloor. Don't forget to share this podcast with your friends and family. If you'd like to read my articles, we have links in our podcast show notes below.
Send your feedback to podcast@sph.com.sg. Find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or within our Straits Times app. Thanks for listening.